Oops. Oh shit. Where am I?
Everything
I
fine?
think so. Yeah, just let me check if we are live. Yes, we are live. I'm here with Lev, my new friend Lev. How you doing?
Hello, how are you? It's a great pleasure to be here, and I love your setup with the multicolored little temples. I don't know what those things are, the lights in the background there.
That's from Dollarama, which is our Canadian version of the dollar Chinese dollar store, and I put little tea lights in them sometimes. I haven't lit them in ages because they don't actually appear on the podcast. I crop myself shorter, so you get to enjoy those, but no one else does. But yeah, this is my little office, my crappy little office in my crappy little apartment in Montreal, Quebec, Canada. And I'm happy to meet you. Very happy to meet you on a short notice. I just reached out and you said yes. That's proof positive that you're a cool guy. Like, hey, want to come chat? Yeah, I do. So that's
You're
pretty cool.
you're you're a cool guy too, Dave. And I love the plant in the background that you got over there. That's a nice looking plant.
The big guys?
You're a big guy,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's thanks to my wife. That's thanks to my wife. Did you notice my wife's artwork when you watched my episode with Sticks? I showed off some of her artwork. Did you notice that?
Could you show it to me again? Here we go. Let's see.
It's like
That is beautiful.
she does all kinds of this one's got bagels. You're Jewish, right?
I am technically Jewish from my grandmother's side, which technically means I'm Jewish from my mom's side, even though my mom wasn't like fully Jewish. So my grandfather is a gypsy, which means that I have magical powers, that I got passed down from my
Ah,
mom's side, which is probably why things are going pretty well with Break the Rules right now. All it
yeah.
really is just magic that makes use on the world. And this is also something that I would love to talk to you about since
Yeah.
you met with Styx before, and like Styx comes from originally a background of Satanism, now mixed with more like pagan demonology, and you yourself were a Satanist. So I'm curious how exactly you view a lot of these things, but let's take it wherever you want to
Yeah.
take it.
Let's do that. Well, I like, I'm a counter striker, like in fighting. Oh, not that I fight, but that's my style. You know, I like to be passive. I like to respond. It would be great if you're a podcast host, so you could kind of like take over and just ask me questions. That would be fantastic. But I am the host. I'm going to rise to my duties. I'm going to ask you some questions, and then we'll get into it. It'll be more of a back and forth. But I always want to find out the background. I want to know how you were raised. Was there faith in philosophy or magic, or what in the home? What's the story with the siblings and the parents? What do they think of your journey, and what are their journeys like? Just the whole context of who you are as a person and how you came to shape and form your worldview. Because we dabble with ideas, we play with ideas, and some of them stick, some of them don't. Some, we go down a rabbit hole and then we decide, oh no, veganism is not the true path or whatever. A lot of people play with feminism, they play with communism, they play with Christianity, and then they become a Muslim or whatever. Anything is possible. So walk us through your journey, your unique journey.
Anything is possible other than probably becoming Muslim and then reverting from that, as far as you know what I'm talking about. That's going to be a tough one. Everything else is I'm just thinking about all those kids who are looking up to Andrew Tate right now, and they convert, and then what happens, it's going to be very hard for them to fall out of that. But relating to what you were talking about right now, I could kind of bridge the gap between Andrew Tate and this, because what I've been noticing is that the things online that are going to be the most popular usually are going to have a grain of truth within them, as far as Tate talking about traditionalism, things like that, but at the same time covered over with so much BS, so much just very low level thinking, very grug brain stuff. And unfortunately, I think that's for the majority of people the only way to get information. You have to put it in the shell. Even if the shell ends up overriding the core, you put it into the shell of something sexually provocative, of something violent, of something like the worst excesses of human nature is something that I think a lot of these things are presented as. No wonder if you go on 4chan, it corresponds to, you being a Catholic, all the seven deadly sins are out there, even though it's also the same place where you have a lot of these people who are talking about returning to tradition and all of that. So I've found that, and this is more of a recent part of my life, from around, the time that Trump was going into the presidency, 2016 to now, even though I was going to 4chan before, that was kind of around the time when I thought, where exactly is the culture going right now? Is there any way that I could find people who are interested in, you know, things that appear on 4chan, like the cores that I was talking about, rather than the shells, but that appear in little blips, and you have to catch it and you have to hold on to it. Otherwise, you're liable to just get lost in a lot of the surface level BS, which a lot of people do. But to rewind the clock a little bit, how I ended up getting into that was I got into animation originally. I saw Hayao Miyazaki's Spirited Away. I got super inspired by that. And that was around when it came out, like 2003. That was the time when I was going to the Lee Strasberg Theater Institute in Manhattan. Before which, by the way, to make a long story short, I was born in St. Petersburg, Russia, came here to America, went to Catholic school actually until
Oh.
fifth grade. So I do have a
Oh.
little bit of experience when it comes to religion there. But in a way, Catholic school got me out of religion. Then I got more into, by the time I'd say it was 2014, 15, 16, maybe a little earlier, I started watching Joe Rogan. I started getting into, like, chakras and yoga and spirituality and all of that. The Wim Hof method, the one where you do these breathing techniques and it gets you into this higher state of being. So around that time, I got really into that, along with, still doing the animation, putting my animations out in film festivals, things like that. And then around 2016, I got interested in what's going on online culturally speaking, because there was a big gap, and I'm sure you've noticed this too. There's a big gap between what's going on in the mainstream versus what's going on in these 4chan type boards and Twitter and so on. And usually these boards have been divided, as far as you have people, even on Twitter, who, they used to be the blue check marks, who are very prominent in their field, who are afraid of tackling certain subjects, and who always feel late to the game. Wherever there was something that was talked about on 4chan, you expect that to be talked about, like a year later, whether it's Epstein or whether it's any other thing. They're always slow when it comes to this stuff. So no wonder the recent revelations right now, everybody's like, oh my God, it's like this is stuff that, we've known for a long, long time. But anyway, to make a long story short about that, I got interested in what's going on in the culture. And around the time the pandemic hit, decided, you know what? I'm going to make a stream where I'm going to bring all of these very online people together with more of the professional mainstream people, because so far the two sides have not met. And like I said in the very beginning, I'm noticing this trend towards the worst excesses being peacocked, and it's understandable why, because people get a lot of clout by moving to those directions. But what I want to do with Break the Rules is see if there is a way a better balance could be achieved. And I'm sure you've had this experience yourself of trying to get the most substance you possibly can from an interview, from talking with people. But at the same time, I also realize I may have to have a girl here. I may have to have like at least two or three girls that are just sitting right by me here. One of them's probably going to wear a German helmet. I'm going to think of how to do that in such a way that everybody comes off happy. But this is kind of the challenge right now, to figure all this out and to try and get high level conversations, while at the same time getting enough people to view those high level conversations without it without it just being a very exclusive thing that only the big brains of the world know about, because you need the algorithm too. So that's in the short way what I'm doing now with Break the Rules.
That's pretty cool. You gave me a very pragmatic story, but you didn't tell me in your heart and soul what you think ultimate reality is. You didn't tell me, do we live in a multiverse? Is there a God? What's ultimate reality? Like, where do you go when you die? Like, tackle some of that stuff in a
I
nutshell. Like,
think that when you
what you believe
In a
today,
nutshell,
and
okay.
what other rabbit holes have you gone down? Were you ever explicitly religious? You know?
I wouldn't say I was ever explicitly religious, and again, I think it was the Catholic school that took the religion out of me, because when they had pictures of, for example, the Garden of Eden, and they had a picture of Adam and Eve, and there's like a lion and a dolphin over there, because I already knew about, and I'm sure that there are some Christians out there who would say, "Oh, the bones are fake," but
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
when I
Full
saw
disclosure, full
dinosaurs,
disclosure, full disclosure.
okay,
I am a young Earth creationist. I don't believe in evolution. I studied physics. I trust.
really, okay,
I do respect the natural sciences, but they're very low in the hierarchy of the sciences. We've got God, we've got theology, we've got philosophy, and then the natural sciences. And the natural sciences depend for their very existence on the philosophical principles. And so, I studied physics at University of Waterloo. I've worked at this Canadian Space Agency. I've worked in quantum physics. I do respect the natural sciences, but there's a lot of fake, bad philosophy that's always couched around the sort of empirical science, which is good, but there's a lot of BS that's always packaged up with it. So we can get into that later, but I just want to let you know, like, I don't believe that, I don't trust the science. I didn't get the jab. I don't know about you. I didn't get the jab. I'm not going to get the jab. And that's sort of a separate issue. But it's the same idiots that are pushing evolution that are pushing the jab and all this, if your little son likes Barbie, then cut his wee wee off. It's like the scientists have lost their minds, and the so-called experts, and we can get into that a little bit. I don't want to lose my YouTube channel though, but we'll see.
well, you may be surprised that there are actually ways we end up overlapping, not probably in the way that you may suspect, but I'm also very skeptical of when it comes to the standard story of humanity, how exactly
Okay.
humanity came to be.
Okay.
Now, I wouldn't say that by skeptical, I mean that I'm 100% assured of any one type of way that all of this happened, but I do have my suspicions. So, as far as the question of, let's say, what happens to you when you die, there's a couple of very interesting things that I could think of happening here. And as far as whether it comes from a religious background, it does not. It comes from more of a background of reading a lot of different things and trying to, I guess you could say, use my imagination and trying to figure out what actually makes more sense here. So when you die, different people who have like past life regression talked about things that they experience. As far as what exactly those experiences are, there's no way for me to know how deep the onion is, meaning there's no way for me to really know whether when you die, you're in some kind of a generated level that somebody else created for you to experience a certain reality. Meaning, there is no way that I can know whether or not, let's say, if it's a heaven, quote unquote heaven, with like fluffy clouds and bunnies and unicorns, farting rainbows or whatever. There's no way for me to know whether that's actually heaven or whether that is, number one, a projection from your own imagination. Because if we go by the whole Platonic idea or Neoplatonic idea of there being a dissemination of forms, of there being a hierarchy
Mm.
of different forms of reality. So we would have in a higher level the realm of thought, in a lower level we would have the thought being materialized. So it would make sense for me to imagine the kind of place where you go to when you die that's made up partly of your own imagination. And this is something that the Buddhists also talked about in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, where they were talking about how you were going to have like these projections of your mind. They're nothing more than projections of the mind. And it doesn't mean that they're not real. Like they become very real. And the other question is whether certain projections of the Buddhas that, let's say, the Tibetans would experience would not necessarily come from one person's imagination, but would come from the collective imagination of a certain people that have certain traditions that get passed on. So collectively, they imagine these particular Buddhas, and that's why they see these Buddhas. So, to make a long story short, I see the afterlife as possibly being a projection from the kind of things that are part of either a collective imagination or a personal imagination or both, as well as possibly residing here on the earth as well. So, for example, people talk about having experiences where they're in a disembodied state, when they're like, floating around the hospital, or they astrally project, for example, when they're not under, anesthesia. And these things point, at least to me, to an idea of all of these existing at the same time. You being able to be at a certain frequency on the planet Earth while at the same time being exposed to the demons or the angels that are roaming through your imagination here. As far as whether you meet other people, that's something that I'm not really sure about. But again, it may be a matter of whether you've prepared for it. Because most people, it's funny, right? Like most people go about life they don't really think about death. I mean, religious people think about death, but they think about death as far as the things that were passed down to them. And I'm not sure how many people who subscribe to any particular faith question as far as, does it really work like this or does it really work like that? So to me, to your original question, like, I don't really hold to any particular religious dogma, but I try to get to the source and try and see what are certain things that came before, let's say, Christianity, what are certain things that existed at the same time as Judaism existed. So for example, when the Jews were exiled in Babylon, how many of the Babylonian influences resulted in the kind of religion that they ended up practicing? If we're talking about like the good versus evil dynamic going on in Zoroastrianism, the end of days thing, a lot of those seem very similar to things that were in the Babylonian faith. Not to mention the whole story of Enki, Enlil, these quote unquote creator gods that are found within the Sumerian text. So that's why, to me, I want to dig deeper, because I'm not really attached to any particular thing. I want to dig deeper and see what exactly is the root of a lot of these different things. So afterlife, that's one interpretation that I personally have, and curious about yours.
Yeah. Well, I just want to sort of address what you were saying in a very, very general way, sort of like to show you where I'm coming from very generally. I came from 25 years of atheism, which got darker and darker, going down the rabbit hole of Western philosophy, exploring ideas, metaphysics, what's ultimate reality, German idealism. That was a rabbit hole I went down. And I'm a Platonist at heart. Okay, I love Socrates, Plato, Aristotle not so much. Okay, but my church emphasizes Aristotle over and above Plato quite significantly these days. Okay, since St. Thomas Aquinas came along. So it is what it is. But we also have Blessed John Duns Scotus, who's more of a Platonist, that sort of Franciscan school. But you can learn about that if you're interested, about the history of Catholicism, the intellectual tradition of Catholicism. But that's not my point. My point is that I'm a Platonist at heart. I'm a rationalist instinctively by proclivity. And ironically, it was Rene Descartes who took me out of my atheism, because I had become a hard solipsist. I didn't believe in the other. I didn't believe in my physical body. I just was a disembodied mind that was playing and having fun in this world. It's a very Buddhist sort of thing where I am the one mind of God or Buddha. And so that's where I was at. And it was Rene Descartes, of all people, who took me out of that. And he's not an Orthodox Catholic by any means, but his discourse on method sort of dealt with the problem of solipsism in an offhand way, not a rigorous philosophical way, but just in an offhand way. And that was enough for me. I latched onto that, and I admitted that I'm not God, that God is God. And I then went on to understand the metaphysics of God, and sort of to understand the uncaused first cause, which I mentioned to Styx, and he sort of brushed it off as sort of, yeah, it might be whatever. But it's not a question. It's like, it's a reality. It's a certainty. If you think about it, if you explore metaphysics, you will understand that there's one and only one necessary being, and that's what we call God. And we can learn some of his attributes and these sorts of things. So that's where I'm coming from. I'm coming from a very dark place of atheism, hard solipsism, atheistic Satanism, a very dark place. And I admit openly that it was an existential motivation to convert, to admit that God is God. But I have since, it's faith-seeking understanding. So I've since understood the rational basis of my monotheism, my classical theism, and it's rock solid. And then the leap of faith into religion, that's a separate issue. I might be wrong about Christianity. I might be wrong about the Catholic Church. I might be wrong that the Pope is infallible and these sorts of things. And I've got Catholics, conservative Catholics, challenging my Catholic faith every day, because they hate Pope Francis. They hate the living magisterium. They like the old church. They like the good old days. So there's no shortage of people challenging my Catholic faith. That's for sure. Online, in the online Catholic community is very anti-Catholic. The Catholic community online is very anti-Catholic. So that's where I'm coming from philosophically. I want to emphasize with you the metaphysics, the certainty that we can have in classical monotheism, classical theism. Okay, people in the Middle Ages that are typically seen as Muslim, they're classical theists. Now, some people want to say they're not even Muslim at all. I do believe that the Muslims worship the one true God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, just like the Jews and Christians. But some people say no, it's only these philosophers that understood the one true God. So I've given you a lot to respond to. I'll let you respond now.
What is, in short, I know you've given me the chance to respond, but I want to know more about this particular argument of Descartes. In short, would you be able to
It
say what it was?
wasn't an argument. It wasn't an argument. It was just a shrugging of the shoulders. Well, of course God is God. Of course God is God. We all know that, right? So it's like it's not that's not the bulwark of my monotheism. That was just the nudge over the edge because I was desperate existentially. I was desperate because it's not fun pretending to be God because it's very lonely because I was the only being in the universe, and not only that, there was no universe. There was no universe, right? And so this is another aspect that I want to challenge you with. Like the reason came later. It's faith seeking understanding. So and you don't need to have faith to prove the existence of God, but once you've proven to yourself the existence of the uncaused first cause, then at that point you do have to have faith. You have to join religion. You have to publicly worship God. This is the way that God has ordained creation. Like creation is real, the other is real, the universe is real. I am a material being. My name is David, and I live in this space and time. And God did create me, and I have to worship Him. And there is heaven and hell, and death and judgment, and these sorts of things. So, what I want to emphasize with you, with my heart solipsism, and then my leap into monotheism, and then I shored that up with metaphysics, and then I took the leap into religion, and so forth, so forth. The essential thing for you, where you're at right now, I mean, you're very young. You're probably in your 20s, 30s. What are you?
35 actually.
The same age as Styx.
Yeah,
Yeah, same age.
yeah.
Cool. Well, the thing I want to sort of nudge you towards is a doubt, a radical doubt, like Descartes promoted, a radical doubt. He was trying to build a foundation for science, natural science, and he used radical doubt. And that's what I had been doing intuitively anyway, just doubting everything that I could possibly doubt as an atheist. And I ended up with the only thing I couldn't doubt is my own existence, because when I deny it, I'm affirming it, as Descartes said, the cogito, I think, therefore I am. So anyway, the thing I'd like you to focus on is the fact that there's no philosophical basis for your belief in the alleged sense perceptions that you use to bump into things, much less an empirical science basis. So the naive realism of most people today, they say, well, of course the world is real, much like I did with God with Rene Descartes, where he said, well, of course God is God, and this sort of thing. That's a sort of naive monotheism. But most people today have a naive realism where they think, well, of course, this microphone in front of me is real. Of course, the other person I'm speaking to is real. Of course, we can't doubt that. That would be silly and foolish to doubt that. But there's still, that's true. But, it remains the fact that there's no proof. There's no proof. There's no test that you could possibly ever devise, because it would be circular reasoning, because you're going to use those very senses that you're trying to test to validate them, and that invalidates the test. I'm sorry. So I
Well,
want you to I
to
want
me,
you to use
that's not
that.
a problem.
Yeah.
I agree. That's not a problem for me. The idea that we're not really going to be able to test reality outside of the limited tools that we have of understanding reality. My whole thing is, I wouldn't say that there was ever a thought that I had that me as I am right now, that I am God. I know that Styx has that in this bio, by the way. I just remembered that. I don't know if he still has that, but I don't really think that I am God. What I think is that I am an extremely small part of something greater, but that there is a hierarchy here, and I am able to access, through working on oneself, through helping others, through doing certain things in this world. I am able to access hierarchies, possibly not only in this life, but in many, many lives to come, that would either bring me up or bring me down, depending on my decisions. So that would be one difference that I would note here, that there wasn't ever, at least for me, any kind of atheism where, nothing is, has any meaning. In fact, it's the opposite. Like, I think every single thing that you do, every single thing that you think, everything has some kind of a result after that. But as far as necessarily saying, well, I'm going to go for this particular religion, I personally don't have the things just for myself to justify doing that based on the things that I know and learn in different kinds of origin stories, in terms of, even if we're going to go down the route of talking about who were the people that were actually present at the time of Jesus, to know that this is, and again, this isn't really my forte. Later on, if you want, I want to bring on for BTR Gnostic and Foreman, and we could have an interesting debate if
Oh,
you'd be willing.
yeah.
But yeah, Neil is a pretty cool
On
guy,
this
and he'd be
stream, on
able to
this
say,
stream right here.
We can do both. I mean, we could have like a first on BTR, then we could do it on your
Okay,
stream, but we'll
okay,
figure it out. We'll figure
okay,
it out.
okay.
But yes,
I thought you
yes.
meant that like as we're speaking, you're gonna like bring him on as a third member of this conversation. But you meant okay
Oh,
in the short
later
term
on.
future,
Yeah,
in the
yeah, yeah.
short term
So
future.
we could
Okay,
plan it out, so we can like
okay,
get people together, to
okay.
watch it and
Who is
stuff.
this guy?
You know, Gnostic informant Neil. I can never pronounce his last name, and I know he'll forgive me. Neil Sedlax. Anyway, Neil is a brilliant guy. He was learning Hebrew. He knows how to read Hebrew now and write Hebrew, I think, as well as Greek.
Cool,
So this is
cool.
somebody who has so much knowledge when it comes to what happened before. And again, I'm not like a copy machine. I'm not going to be able to
Of
recite
course,
every
of
single thing
course.
he said, but he was, bringing on other people like Rabbi Tobias Singer, who
Uh-huh.
was talking about how certain, let's say, justifications that Christians have for the New Testament to, sorry, for the Old Testament to predict the coming of Jesus, that those are actually mistranslations of what in the original Hebrew means something completely different. And again, I'm not going to be able to present examples for you
Yeah,
right now, but those are just like some things that lead me to question as far as yes, I understand that there are things beyond our comprehension. I'm not sure that I would be able to put my faith into this particular, let's say, religion or this particular denomination of the religion because of what I just said, because of all of these other things that I've learned and that I have observed. And it does not mean being an atheist at all. And it doesn't mean being a Buddhist. And it doesn't mean being a Hindu or whatever. What it basically means is I see people playing games of telephone while at the same time, in terms of more of the esoteric practices, being able to reach into something much deeper. So, if we're talking, for example, about Plato, Plato was allegedly also a member or took part in various mystery schools
yeah.
that existed back then in ancient Egypt, in Babylon, and it's from a lot of these mystery schools that we also get these various ideas of this emanation of energy within the person. One could even see that, for example, in the Holy of Holies, where the two Roman generals at different times, when they went into Jerusalem and took it over, they went into the Holy of Holies. The first time around, they saw a golden statue of a man riding on a donkey. The second
Oh,
time, they saw a golden wreath, not grape leaves, but like a different kind of like leaves. I think it's also related to wine, which is specifically related to the god Dionysus. And it's very interesting where we keep coming back to this idea of the Hebrews not necessarily just having like this very strict Old Testament faith as we have the idea, but actually having Zeus, having Dionysus, having a lot of these different gods that to, let's say, modern day Christians or Jews for that matter, they would consider that to be verboten. What are you doing with all these pagan gods? So in that way, I do see what has transpired as being a continuation of what has occurred for time immemorial, as far as these various archetypes playing into how people act, having to also do with astrology, having to do with the position of the earth and the solar system and the sun and the planets and all of that. If we're talking about the Greek pantheon, the Roman pantheon, as well as the Sumerian. But at the same time, there is also a very interesting thing, which it's not my idea. It's an idea of a guest who I've had on, Jason Risa Giorgiani. Very interesting dude. Have you heard of Jason?
no.
Jason is a scholar. He is somebody who is very unorthodox in the way that he perceives reality, but all the more reason why I'm very fascinated by the examples that he brings up all the time. So his vision is very similar to mine in that when it comes to aliens, we see there being two types. So at least this is something that I think makes a lot more sense. Type number one has to do with, again, like this emanation of thought forms into solid matter that I talked about before, where people experienced, for example, kind of related to the Catholic faith here, seeing the Virgin Mary in various places where, as far as I've read, they experience the visions of certain fertility goddesses in that exact same location before. And it wasn't a smooth transition either. where they would see this entity who would be like this gold, shining young woman. And she wouldn't even refer to herself as Mary, but later on, since they started calling her Mary, because who else would it be? Now she's Mary. And I found that to be a very interesting interplay between the things that are around us, the things that you could say like our imagination gives energy to, and our imagination was able to give energy to these particular goddesses. So now they assume the form of the Virgin Mary. But that would be like one example of one explanation for the aliens, which would be again like these thought forms that are generated in a back and forth relationship. So I'm not just saying that these thought forms are just like our imagination coming to life. It's a combination of our imagination coming into life as well as the thought forms themselves. So who is to say that what we're doing right now, that I am not just an emanation of various thought forms that has been given flesh and the ability to live out as this ego being? But the other kind of aliens would be, and by the way, cliffhanger, my window is very cold right now. I have to close it. So I am going to close it right now. Quick cliffhanger. But while I'm closing it, I'm still going to hear you. Let me know what you think about that alien. And then I'm going to tell you the
Okay.
other alien. So
Sure.
hold on.
Go for it.
Cliffhanger time.
Be careful. Do your thing. I want to give a shout out to Emily and Bird of Prey. Bird of Prey says, "Go Lev, clank." Emily says, "Grateful for the gift of being able to ponder philosophy, to be armchair philosophers, and yet this brings me to the very point that something must have given me this ability, and I know it wasn't me." True enough. Did you hear that? Bird of Prey is here, and my friend Emily. Emily says, "Let's do this, David. Styx, Lev, Gnostic Informant, and Diabolically Informative." Do you know Diabolically Informative? Have you talked to him?
No, I would love to. I would love to reach out and find out more.
Do you know anything about him?
No.
He's, from what I can recall, I've interviewed him years ago, and I think he's some sort of idealist. I always am sympathetic to idealists. It sounds like you're kind of an idealist in some ways because these ideas take form, right?
Hmm.
And they have some substantial reality. And I'll have to go back and listen to his interview, but he was definitely interested. He had sort of like a Pythagorean mathematical mysticism, which is always interesting too. There was a weird cult going around with this circus guy, sword swallowing guy with long hair and no eyebrows. I don't know if you remember him, like a platinum blonde guy, and I forget the name of this cult. Maybe someone in the live chat will remind me. But he had this sort of Pythagorean mysteries cult. It was very cheesy, very really like Scientology kind of vibes that you get from this guy. But anyway, all
Yeah.
kinds of people out there with all kinds of ideas. I'm always interested to hear people's ideas. But when you were speaking, it reminds me of the analogy of the parable that Jesus said about building on sand as opposed to building on the rock. We have to build on the rock. Otherwise, your edifice, no matter how beautiful and intricate your edifice is, it's just going to come crumbling it down eventually, right? So the rock for me is metaphysics. It's like, we have to have a basis, a solid basis, using our reason, our God-given reason. We have to have a solid metaphysics, and all of the edifice. Like when people come at me and they talk about the Bible, contradictions in the Bible allegedly, or this historical fact, or something from archaeology, or whatever, or like parallels in mythology, or whatever it is, these are like, the fruits and the flowers and the leaves and the branches of this great tree, which is, yeah, it's beautiful and whatever, like this Catholic Christian tree, it's beautiful and everything. But I'm not interested in the critique of those outer sophisticated layers. I'm interested in the root. And the root is that metaphysical thing, like I am. God's name is I am, right? So we have to come to terms with that. What is our relationship with being per se? So ontology is at the heart of everything. And then we've got epistemology. And then we can start looking at the roots and the trunk. And then eventually, once you have the faith, you can appreciate the foliage and all that sort of thing. So that's how I see it. So I see it really, no offense, but I see a lot of the approach that you're taking as a complete waste of time, irrelevant, and moot when you haven't examined the root. You haven't looked at the metaphysics. You don't know what being is and what the source of being is. Do you understand? So I hope I'm not being condescending or insulting, but that's really how I react to any sort of sophisticated criticism of the branches and the flowers and all that.
Well, when we're talking about the branches and the flowers, those are the contradictions I mentioned Gnostic and Foreman specifically talking about here, which to me are number two, if not number 10, compared to what I view as the root, which is not too dissimilar from what you see as the root. But my root doesn't really have much to do personally with, like the Pope or with communion or with any of the particular things which would come out from the path that you went on. And I understand what you're saying, that in order to have these branches, you have to have like the strong root. And I'm all for the root. In fact, the whole process of trying to get at what exactly these mystery school traditions were is my process of rooting down into as solid of a ground as possible, which doesn't have anything to do with whatever occurred in ancient Rome around the time of Apostle Paul. It goes before whatever happened with Apostle Paul. So that's just my thing here. But then there's another thing, which is Giorgiani's way of looking at it, which again, I'm not saying this is exactly what happened, but to me, it's a very, very interesting to think about, which is that when you take a look at the Torah, the Bible, it doesn't really read like a lot of these metaphysical archetype laden texts. If we're talking about any of these mythologies of the gods, any of the Joseph Campbell hero with a thousand faces stuff, the Bible is not that. What the Bible seems to be a lot more is this kind of how do I say this uh kind of not that archetypical type of story, which to me actually means that it's probably real, meaning that it doesn't follow this very clean story mythology type structure. People try to put mythology in there, and I'm sure many people have attempted to do so, but all the more it strikes me as being something that it takes a couple of assumptions to make. Assumption number one is that if we're willing to go with the idea that we have a lot of these various entities out there in the ether that we can possibly interact with, whether we're talking about the Virgin Mary sightings, whether we're talking about UFO abductions, whether we're talking about anything that has to do with like fairies, elves, paris they were called in Iranian, any of these jinn, in Islam, any of these entities, then we can, assume just for a second, if we believe this to be the case, that there are more things going on in our reality than we have the understanding of knowing like what exactly it is. And just like a dog has no idea what a computer is, there's probably things out there that operate on higher levels than we're aware of.
Yeah.
But this also requires then not requires, but this also leads me to this same thought that Johnny went on as well, which is okay, if we assume these things are out there, then why do we assume that whatever shows itself to be God, with a capital G, is necessarily God? What if it's just another, let's say, higher level being that knows how to properly manipulate humanity so as to have certain things happen at a certain time? We're talking about a being that, let's say, may have access to time travel, or a being that may have access to all kinds of technology. And by technology, I don't mean like even ones and zeros. I mean being able to go into these realms that we could possibly go into using DMT, for instance, but being able to travel in such a way that it would be the equivalent, again, like the internet and a dog, trying to find out what exactly their owner is doing on this machine. So the reason why I'm saying this is Giorgiani's stake on what exactly happened with the whole Ark of the Covenant coming out of Egypt, the pillar of fire and pillar of smoke. Not me, but Jason thinks, and, and I'm entertaining this thought. It's an interesting thought that that was actually a spacecraft. That was actually a UFO that was guiding the Hebrews that landed on the mountain there, where Moses, went up, and, with like the billowing smoke and all of that stuff going on. And that these crafts have had a lot of this, interaction with humanity. And again, this wouldn't be the first time. It would go back, to the Sumerians, talking about these civilization, creator gods that gave humanity, civilization. And when we're talking about those aliens, we're not talking about little green men. We're not talking about grays. We're talking, at least in Jason's point of view, we're talking about like very tall, possibly blonde, like these big godlike beings who are very powerful and know how to manipulate people for their own ends. That would be, at least to me, if I was a betting man, I would say, okay, there's this thing, if we assume it's real, that people experience, that prophets experienced, that they were meeting with, for example, if we go back to the Old Testament, there was that meeting that I believe Jacob had with the God, a couple of angels, but also the God. And please correct me if I'm wrong, but there was literally the God, the one and only, in the flesh, standing there along with his angels. When I read that particular passage, and this was around the time, the whole Sodom and Gomorrah thing was going down. When I read that passage where it says, it was the God, it's like, okay, hold on, hold on. This sounds more like a captain. This sounds more of like the big boss who was there surveying what was going on, and less like this entity of oneness. So in terms of my hierarchy, I would put that into, some being that would be, possibly in charge of what's going on in a certain part of this planet, but not necessarily the one and only oneness of existence.
Yeah, I want to give a shout to my friend Phil Gonzalez. He's here. He pointed out a little blooper that you made. It wasn't Jacob, it was Abraham that you're talking about, probably.
Mm,
N-
Abraham. No, no, Abraham? Yeah, Abraham. Abraham. That's right.
Probably. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. But
Yeah, yeah.
why would you say, what would you say if someone asked you, why is there something rather than nothing? Because
I believe
this
that
is
God.
getting back to
No,
the
I believe that
ontology
God
of
exists.
metaphysics.
I
Okay, okay,
I I
okay,
believe that God exists.
okay,
Nothing that I'm saying
okay,
is touching at the root. This
okay.
is the difference, because right now, if you are, let's say, poking at my differentiation versus you when it comes
Yeah,
to the root,
okay,
you're not gonna have a fun time
okay,
poking because
okay,
there's nothing to poke.
okay,
Because I
okay,
think we're pretty much simpatico when it
okay.
comes to that. My whole thing is, okay, now that we have the root, what exactly happened?
Yeah.
Why do we assume that it was A rather than B? And all the things that I was talking about right now leads me to, the conclusion of it possibly, if it did happen that way, being advanced beings who might as well also be human beings, but a different kind of human being, that were smart enough to figure certain things out and were able to manipulate humanity.
Saint Augustine in the City of God. If you haven't read it, you should read it. It's very entertaining, very colorful. Okay, it's not just a dry old book. It's very exciting. Um, he says, among other things, that his whole purpose for writing the book, is basically to talk about the city of God and to contrast that with the city of man or the city of Satan. He said there are two cities characterized by two loves: love of self unto contempt of God, and love of God unto contempt of self. So, which team are you on?
I would say love of God. But
Nice.
again, the God that I'm talking about has nothing to do with St. Paul and has nothing to do with any of these things that went into turning into Christianity.
No, but
That's my whole point. It's like,
your root is the source of everything that's part of that tree, and there's nothing that's not related to your God. There's nothing that's not related to your God. There's a relationship there.
sure,
There's a
sure.
relationship there. There could be denial. I could deny it. I was atheist 25 years. I could deny the relationship. The relationship is there. And St. Paul, the relationship is there, right? You could say he was wrong. You could say he was wrong about Judaism. He was wrong about Christianity. You could say that. Maybe he was wrong. But you can't deny that he has a relationship with God. So that's the thing. Like, what's your relationship with God? Do you worship God? Because in justice, we owe God worship. I mean, the classical philosophers knew this. We owe God worship. It's the virtue of justice.
I like the idea of arguing with God rather than worshiping God, which is something that the Jews
Yeah,
do. And the reason why I like it is because if you argue with God, if you like go back and forth with God, then in a way I think you're testing yourself as
yeah,
opposed to just letting not God, but letting man rule over you, as was the case with the Russian Orthodox Church. For example, in Russia, one of the unfortunate things that happened was when the Mongolians took over there, the Golden Horde, the Khan, he got the son of like one of the princes there in Kiev, whose name is Alexander Nevsky. I'll say it in a Russian accent. Alexander Nevsky.
I see.
He got Alexander Nevsky to be his like boss within that whole area, who was taking money from all the people, from their harvest, from the grain, from the monetary tribute through coin to the Khan. And if they didn't pay up, he would burn the village down. And the reason why Alexander Nevsky did this was because he wanted to preserve Orthodox Christianity from those evil Catholics. Oh my God. Think of how horrible that would have been if the Germans and the
Mm.
Swedes, would have went into Russia and converted people to Catholicism. Oh my God, that would be so horrible. But
Apparently,
the
apparently,
reason why, yeah,
apparently, Phil Gonzalez says Genghis Khan's mother was a Christian. I don't know if that's true. Interesting.
good for him. But here's the thing. What ended up happening there was you had these churches where the Russian Orthodox were saying a prayer to for the health of the Khan and his family. Meanwhile, the Mongolians were doing whatever they wanted to the Russians. They were bullying them. They were keeping them in the state of cattle, literally cattle, because the Mongolians started all these breeding programs. That's actually how we got, from what I understand, that's how we got so many Russians in the first place. That they were just like breeding people cattle, and this people cattle was later on used by the Russian monarchs, by the czars, as all of these, like, as these slaves, as these serfs who were tied to their land. So the idea that the Russians had like Rodina and all of that, that was based like the land that I'm tied to, not because of like some blood and soil thing, but because I'm literally tied to this land. I cannot leave this land. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
the kind of mentality that the Mongols administered in there. And my whole thing was that the people who were worshiping, who were giving thanks to the Khan and all of that, the justification was Christianity,
Mm.
but they were not using their mind in order to understand the horrible trick that was being pulled on them when it came to being under the thumb of these Mongols. So my whole thing here is that there has to be a balance between freeing a person's mind while at the same time having enough responsibility to use that freed mind to help the people around them to grow in wisdom. And it's hard because that's always like the seductive thing, is like knowing too much for your own good, right? And that is an interesting thing that I think people should deal with, as opposed to just saying, well, going down the rabbit hole. I'm not going to bother arguing with God. I'm not going to bother questioning, because everything is already laid out. To me, when everything is already laid out, which is fine as far as, having society function in a certain way, but at a certain point it starts to denigrate humanity. So I'm going to throw this curveball at you, and I'm curious what you think. Let's say evolution's not real. Let's say that, I'm just saying this, I'm not saying this is real, but just for the sake of argument, let's say that human beings can actually devolve, and they could devolve into animals. And let's say human beings, as far as this, let's say, mode of transportation for one's spirit to be able to exist in an embodied state, is something that's existed far, far longer than we have any idea. And let's say that civilizations have come and went, not only Atlantis, but even, before that, for so many different times. And the beings that didn't have what it takes, that did not take up the mantle of being able to perceive things outside of their very limited reality at the time, those beings ended up succumbing to the gravity of Mother Nature and they ended up becoming animals, and they ended up getting wild, and stop building shelters, stop reading books. And in a way, I think we have examples of those things in life in general, without necessarily having to go down the rabbit hole of people turning into animals.
Mm.
We have people spiritually turning into animals. We have people who start beating their kids, when they're young. We have people who, like beat their spouses, who, live in a pigsty, who, would knock people over the head just because it's fun. Like that to me is also a kind of spiritual degradation that occurs over time that must be addressed. And my whole point is that, I'm sorry, but you have a lot of people who claim to have a lot of faith, who go to church, who do all that stuff. But at the end of the day, they're doing it because they don't want to go to hell. They're not doing it because they want to ascend beyond the level that they're in. They're doing it for the same reason certain criminals don't commit crimes, not because they think it's wrong, but because they don't want their hands chopped off. And if you've noticed, the people who come from those places, when they go into like Sweden or wherever, where the punishment is going to be a lot more lax than having your hand chopped off, all of a sudden they're, doing whatever they want to, because they know they're not going to get punished with the hand being chopped off. And I guess the priest or the imam or whoever, was supposed to warn them about hell, that message didn't come through as strong as the sword did. So that's what I mean. Like, I want people to get to the level. I'm sure not everybody will, all at once, obviously, but I want them to get to the level where they don't need the sword to know not to do bad things. And I think that we have examples of people today, like in Japan, for example, just picking Japan here, but you would have no sense that somebody's going to come and, knock you in the back of the head. And it's not going to be because they're afraid that they're going to get their hands chopped off or their head chopped off. It's going to be because they understand in a way that we're all in this together, and that why would I cause harm to another living being? And that is something. I'm not saying that religion didn't play a role and certain traditions didn't play a role in instilling that, but all that I'm saying is that that's the level that I want people to get to, not the level where they're just being, afraid of getting punished, and that's why they don't do right, or the level where they're, saying prayers for the Khan, while they're being abused by all of these, highfalutin to kings and lords and whatnot.
Yeah. So I got a couple of notes I took. I'll just respond. And sorry if it doesn't get at the core of what you were saying, but it's just this what came to mind. Okay. So first of all, devolution. I do believe in devolution, not evolution. It's just I think it's a scientifically established fact that things are devolving. And when we look at Adam and Eve, they were far superior to us. I mean, they were created perfect in a perfect paradise, and because sin entered the world, everything's devolving since then. Okay. You can meet Christians who believe in evolution, and they believe that Adam and Eve were just sort of like these loose populations, and that's just a sort of how we talk about them is Adam and Eve, but they were just sort of these apes that evolved. Um, but I don't believe that. I think it's a very antichrist idea. Um, the dogma that the soul is the form of the body will prevent me from admitting, so long as I'm Catholic, admitting that a human could become a non-human. A human is a human. The soul is the very form of the body. Now, there is that story in the Bible about Nebuchadnezzar becoming like an animal as he grew his fingernails and he was hairy and he lived. I don't know if you know the story of Nebuchadnezzar, but I forget which Old Testament book it's in. Interesting story, but it's because he offended God. He neglected God. He was proud. And then eventually, after he had been punished, he came back to God. So it's a beautiful story. I don't believe that, literally that a human can become a beast, but we can certainly become beast-like. So that's just to address that point. And then in terms of fear of punishment, fear of hell, it is good. It's very good. It's very good, but it's not perfect. Okay, it's not perfect. The church teaches us that we have to be good for goodness sake. We have to love God because he's lovable. And we can't treat God like a big bully in the sky and fear him in that way, but we also can't treat him like a vending machine, like, hey, my big daddy, sky daddy is going to give me everything I want, prosperity gospel. In between those two sinful attitudes is love. Love the good son, loving
Mm.
the good father, So I just wanted to address those 3 points. And your vision about what life could be, it's certainly interesting, and there are a million and one possibilities, and you can play with the ideas, and you can sort of figure out which one you feel more comfortable with, or whatever. But it doesn't really get to the heart of the matter, which is like, what is ultimate reality at the end of the day? Is there any difference between the worst case scenario and the best case scenario for any human being? Like if you want to, I often ask, Satanists or materialists or atheists, I often ask the question, or Hindus even, and Buddhists, like, is there any difference? Like, if you want to indulge in evil, yeah, you're going to suffer because karma, cause and effect. Like, yeah, you do stupid things, fuck around and find out, but
Mhm.
but there's no moral reason. Like, there's no actual, there's nothing I could ever say to you if you said, hey, I want to explore the dark side. um you know um Unless you're Christian, unless you fear God, the God of classical theism, the God of monotheism, the God of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, there's nothing I can say to you that will convince you to not go down the dark path. But I'm just wondering, you're
Well,
kind of
what
in a gray,
exactly is the
you're
dark path? When you say the dark path, just so we're on the same page here, what do you mean by the dark path?
selfishness. So when you think, like I said, there are two cities characterized by two loves, love of self and contempt of God. That's the dark path. So if you say, well, Granny's gonna die soon anyway, and she got a lot of money, so I'll just like grab her purse and push her down the stairs. That's a very selfish move. And if you can make a lot of money with your plastic factory and you kill 16 villages downstream from you, yeah, you got the money, you got the nice lifestyle, and you might even have a good reputation because people like powerful, rich people. But that was a shitty thing you did. It was a selfish thing you did. So that's the dark path. Those are two examples.
Yeah.
And so, or if you just love sugar and salt like I do, you could just be a glutton and then get all kinds of diseases. That's not good either.
Yeah. Well, that's also the example there of ignorance being punished by, if we were to take, for example, the Hindu idea, ignorance ends up being punished by having like these karmic retributions, whether it's in this life, whether it's in the next one, so on and so forth. So in a way that does even out, and that doesn't necessarily mean that there is no morality at play here, because I'll give you this example. In the Kabbalah, they have this idea of the creator, the state of God, as being one of all giving without wanting to receive anything. And the whole point of studying Kabbalah is to transmute one's qualities from that of receiving to that of giving for the sake of giving. And in a way, I think that falls in nicely to the thing that you're also seeing, even though we may be seeing it through different perspectives. My issue, again, is not the root. My issue is when we're talking about like the Sky Daddy God, is that this particular entity is one that allowed, caused rather, the genocide of Jericho. It's the entity that caused the death of the Egyptian firstborns. Because keep in mind, like, he was the one who convinced Pharaoh, hardened his heart. It was his doing. It wasn't the Pharaoh's doing at the end of the day. This is an entity that tested, with the whole child sacrifice thing, with Abraham. So when I take a look at those acts, they don't really strike me, or, poor Job, which at the end of the day, the whole justification was, Job, I can do this because F you. I'm God. I could do whatever I want. Who are you to, talk back to me? So in the end, when I take a look at those qualities, that's not the God at the root. That's not the creator that gives for the sake of giving. That's a tyrant. But also, in the metaphysical sense, that is the left hand of God, which means that it's the left hand that should be opposed, actually. And the whole thing with Judaism, in my opinion, was that it was a way of kind of breaking people out at that time of of a dogmatic idea. Because if you notice, like I said before, with the Jews, they like to argue with God a lot, and I think that that was something that resulted in the waking up in a way. Because if you take, just like as an example, if you would describe some megamaniacal dictator that would cause the kind of things that God did, as far as the genocides and all of that. And if you were to present this to somebody and ask them, like, hey, what do you think of this? They take a step back, they're like, nah, I don't know, man, not for me. This guy seems to be a little bit too bloodthirsty for my taste. And the question here, going back to the name of Israel, to wrestle with God means, at least to me, is that I don't think that if we're talking about God in the sense of not specifically this tyrant, but in the sense of like oneness, that oneness would necessarily want us to blindly worship somebody. It's like, how many times do I have to, pardon my French here, piss on your doorstep before you kick me out? You know what I mean? Like, how many times must I destroy the vases in your house before you call the police on me? So for me, a lot of these things could be looked at as saying, wait a minute, he's doing what? Are we really supposed to worship this person? Or is there something deeper here that we can get? So that's why I see this whole wrestling with God happening in the Old Testament, not necessarily meaning that God is right. That may not really be the case here.
Yeah. I'm just curious what you think about me and other Christians and Jews and Muslims who worship God. I don't know what the Muslims teach in their holy book. Let's just stick to the Jews and the Christians because I'm ignorant of the Quran. But they claim Abraham is their father in the faith, so I mean they could be included. I just want to include them. But I'm just curious. Let's limit it to me. Like I'm sitting here in front of you right
Yeah.
now. I'm a Christian. I'm Catholic, and I read the Bible, and I'm not revolted. I mean, I do have the instinct of revulsion. I do have that reaction. Yes, I do have that reaction, but I override it. So my question to you is, how do you think? How do you suppose that I can override the natural revulsion to some of the stuff that's attributed to God? What do you think's happening? And then take a stab at it, and then I'll tell you what's really happening.
Okay. I think what's happening is that by doing good things for other people, you are channeling not that, let's say, left hand, the punishing hand of God, but that you're channeling, I would say, what is this sense of giving for the sake of giving, that is something that you want to bestow upon other people. And as far as the rest, you could say, well, we deserve it because we are in a fallen state and we are sinners and all of that. But again, the same excuses could be given to, those poor Russians that I was talking about earlier, when they live this life of slaves and they say, well, this life isn't good, but next life is going to be great. Like, I just don't want people to keep being duped by being in the state of having to say that, oh, I'm bad, I'm a sinner. Like, yes, sure, we're all sinners, we all sin. But the question, as far as which particular entity, which particular being do you want to worship? And if that being includes doing things of that nature, I just don't view that being as being good. I view, let's say, certain things that may have come out of that relationship as far as, the order of society and all of that. Sure, we could make the argument that just like within Islam, where they would chop your hands off for stealing within certain places, you can make the argument that the roughness and toughness of, old school Christian values made society function in a certain way so that we could at least survive. And sure, that's great. I'm just saying, let's take a step beyond that. I think it may be time for us to take a step beyond that and try to figure out what exactly is necessarily going on here. And do we necessarily have to have the same loving relationship to this abusive, tyrannical archetype?
Okay, so unfortunately, you didn't really answer my question, not the way I want you to. So I'm going to rephrase it. Okay, I believe
Okay.
I came to classical theism, monotheism, through reason, pure reason, without any recourse to any faith-based beliefs whatsoever. Okay, so we can know that God exists, the first, the first uncaused first cause, that than which nothing greater can be conceived. We know that He's infinite in every pure perfection. Every perfection it's better to have than not to have. We know He's not a bully. We know He's not greedy. We know He's not lustful. We know He's not selfish. We know He's not stupid. We know He's not ignorant of anything. He knows everything, and He's all powerful and everything, and He's absolutely simple, not composed of parts, much less composed of essence and existence. So His essence is existence. So given the fact that you know that about me, you know the God that I worship, that's the God that I worship. He's squeaky clean. How do I then open the Old Testament, read it, and how do I put those two together? The God in the Bible that looks messy, and there's that anthropomorphic edge to him, and the God of philosophy, And I have to tell you, some Christians don't like that I worship the God of philosophy. They think this is a fantasy. They think it's ungrounded. But I disagree. And the church disagrees too. It's a dogma of my faith that we can know the existence of God and we can know that he's infinite in every pure perfection. But that's not sufficient. We have to take the leap of faith into the messy reality of the Bible and salvation history. So how do you think that I reconcile this internal tension that exists, given the fact that my God is perfect, absolutely and infinitely, objectively, eternally perfect, and then when I turn to the Bible, it looks really messy and ugly?
Don't bury the lead. Tell me. I want to know.
Well, it's by distinguishing baby from bathwater. And if you read the saints, if you read the early church fathers, you'll see that they too were not stupid. They knew that God doesn't have arms. God is not composed of parts. God is not angry. God doesn't harden Pharaoh's heart, for example. Okay, God did not harden Pharaoh's heart. Okay, so you ask the Catholic saint, well, what do you mean God didn't harden Pharaoh's heart? It says right here in the Bible that he did. And St. Augustine will turn around to you and say, well, Christians don't need the Bible, and I would not even believe in the Bible were it not for the authority of the Holy Roman Catholic Church. So it's about the living church. It's about the living God. It's about Jesus Christ, the God-man Jesus Christ, who became incarnate, and he built a church, and that church is a prolongation of that incarnation, and it's human and divine, the church. And the church gave us the Bible, and the church alone can interpret the Bible. And when it says that that God hardened Pharaoh's heart, it doesn't mean that God hardened Pharaoh's heart. Okay, so that's how you reconcile the God of philosophy with
Says who that it doesn't mean that? That's what I don't
the
get. Like
church, the
if it's
church,
written,
the church, the church, the church.
so if the church says 2 + 2 is 5, does
Yes,
that mean that the church is right?
Saint Ignatius of Loyola said, if the
Wow.
hierarchical church says that black is white, I will believe it. That's because there is paradox. There is no contradiction. There is no possible contradiction. Okay, I'm not a fool. You are not a fool. You do not accept contradiction, but you have encountered paradox. You've seen mystery. You've seen mirages. You've seen illusions. You've stuck a straw into water and see how it looks like it bends. You know it doesn't bend. So we have God-given reason and free will, and we can submit to the church if we believe that the church is Christ, and if we believe that Christ is God, and we believe that God is infinite in every pure perfection, then it all flows and it all follows. Now, having said that, I might be wrong. Christ might be a liar, a legend, or a lunatic, right? He might be. I don't think so, right? It would be hard to convince me of that. But I mean, it's possible because it's a faith-based belief system. But God, the uncaused first God, there's nothing you could do or say to shake my knowledge that God is God. So that's why I'm building on rock and not on shifting
But
sand.
but the rock that you're building right now is the rock that it's very hard to debate, and like I said before, I agree with
Right.
that rock. The only thing is that it seems just like as a side here, it seems like when you're talking about these various contradictions,
Yeah.
all of a sudden there you quickly like put up the shield of here's the rock. Here's like the thing that we agree on. Here's the thing that we agree
No,
on.
no, no.
Meanwhile, all this other stuff having to do with these contradictions, when we're talking about 2 + 2 is 5,
Yeah.
I'm not going to take that while I could still take the rock. I could still take the
Yeah.
rock of the,
Yeah.
unmoved mover, but I'm
Yeah.
not going to settle for these contradictions because I find it
But I've already
philosophically
said,
to be
I've already
very,
said that you and I hate lies, we hate falsehood, and we hate errors, and we hate contradiction. That's a fact.
yes,
Okay.
yes.
So I don't believe in contradiction. I believe there's a perfectly reasonable explanation for everything. It's called the principle of sufficient reason. That's why I'm not an evolutionist. Evolution violates that principle among others. Okay, so it's like there's a hierarchy to my belief. I believe in God because of because of causality. I believe in Christianity because of the historical record of all the monotheistic religions. If you're going to be a monotheist, then you just sort of have to, you don't have to, you could make your own monotheistic religion, but I think it's reasonable to look at the options. Okay, what are the other monotheists believing? Some believe this, some believe that. And if we look at what happened 2,000 years ago, our very calendar calls out for an explanation. What happened 2023 years, 2024 years, excuse me, ago? What happened? So it's all about the Jewish Messiah. Did the Jewish Messiah come or not? Well, I believe he did. I think look at the history; it's pretty obvious. The Jews say no, and the Muslims say no. So, I mean, reluctantly, I became a Christian just by looking at history. And then when when I looked at the question of authority, well, all the Christians love their Bible, but where did they get their Bible? By what authority do they know that this is the canon of Scripture? So there's an interdependence in this hierarchy of truths. I have a very solid base, and like I say, I might be wrong about Jesus Christ. I don't think so. But the attacks on Christianity or Catholicism or whatever, pedophile priests, whatever, it's like I just shrug it off. I just shrug it off, really, because I have God. I have God. My concern for you is that if you have God as you claim, you should feel the impulse to worship, because this God is not a bully. This God is not weak. This God is not a big man in the sky with all your flaws. No, God is infinitely perfect in every way. And maybe to learn that, you need to go back and look at the metaphysics. And Blessed John Duns Scotus does a good job of showing how it's necessary, that God has his attributes. He even goes so far as to make an argument, make a case, okay, not proving, but making a case for the Trinity, which is a very, very ambitious project because it's a mystery that we'll never be able to understand.
Very interesting. I think that from here, this is going to be good to transition
Yeah.
into a BTR stream with you, me, and Neil,
Yeah.
and we can really get into the nitty gritty here. Because at this point, I feel like I'm heading into the territory where Neil is going to be able to
Yeah.
give a lot more info here. But this is a very fascinating discussion. And I really appreciate the fact that you're interested in having this and
Do you
going
have a
back and
little bit more
forth.
time for me? Do you have a little bit more time for me?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. Shoot.
Let's do other things, okay? Because I don't want to beat a dead horse. My first question for you, though, is, and you'll feel free to ask me other questions that aren't necessarily related to that. And we'll dig into it next time on BTR. But what I'm curious about is because you're passionate about this subject and you've read a lot and you've got some, philosophical and anthropological and religious study behind you, obviously. I'm just wondering, is this one of many interests? You've got your animation, you've got politics, you've got philosophy, religion. Uh, how dominant is this set of ideas in your day-to-day thought process? Is this something that dominates your daily thoughts, or is this one of many hobbies for you?
Well, I wouldn't say hobby because hobby would mean that it
Cheapens it.
doesn't serve as it doesn't serve as important of a role. Because at the end of the day, we are trying to find out what are we gonna do to prepare for death, because death does come to all of us. And so as far as what exactly we do in this life, how we treat other people, what we think about, and all of that stuff, I think it's all part of the process. I don't think there is one thing that you could ever do in life that wouldn't count towards something either in a good way or a bad way. And so these are like little reminders that I want to put out for myself throughout the day, that every single thing you do does matter. And when it comes to other interests, there is also, like the geopolitical stuff. I'm very big right now in making sure that Russia does not expand into the rest of Europe, going through Ukraine and all of that. And I noticed that a lot of people who are on BTR and who watch BTR, this is the thing that they disagree with me the most about. Because I think going back to what happened in World War II, or pre-World War II rather, people were sick of World War One. They didn't want to go into any other war, and now all of a sudden you had Hitler arming up, and people were very reluctant, and you know the whole story. So now Putin's been saying that he wants to go beyond Ukraine. Medvedev has been saying that, who is the former Russian president, as well as like all the people there in the Russian media. This isn't the first time this has happened. He also tried it with Georgia. He also has an outpost in New Transnistria, which was illegally annexed before. That is in Moldova. So you have these signs having to do with him weaponizing migrants. So a lot of the migrant crisis that we're seeing, not only in Europe, but in the United States as well, has Putin as the cause. Obviously, it wouldn't work if the people who are, these leftist politicians here in Europe and the US weren't, opening everything up like they were. Obviously, If they were, stricter like Viktor Orban or something, it would be a different story. But nevertheless, he has been weaponizing migration, most recently doing that in Finland, where he was bringing all of these Africans, they were biking right to the border of Finland. And there have been Russian officers or Russian sailors that were arrested many, many times from smuggling migrants into Italy through the coast in Greece there. So this has been happening for a very long time. The Mexican embassy, the Russian Mexican embassy, rather in Mexico, the Russian embassy in Mexico has way more of the Russian spooks there than their Brazilian embassy has. And it's funny because Brazil is a part of BRICS, along with Russia. Meanwhile, their Mexican one has way, way, way more of the spies there. And they've been working with Venezuela together, along with Hezbollah, to do their whole drug trade, which Putin's been doing, since the early '90s. He's been trading weaponry, like Soviet weaponry, to South America for drugs. And he was also using the aid money that was sent over to help Russia out, to purchase those drugs and to resell those drugs. Anyway, to make a long story short, the alliance we're seeing right now on the world stage is Iran, China, and Russia. Those are like the main ones. And again, I don't want to sound like a neocon war pig because I understand that these people also love making all the money from war. But my whole thing is like, okay, let's not be so
Naive.
let's not naive and shallow, because I think that people instantly look at the war pigs bad, neoconservatives bad, and sure, yes, they're bad. Okay, let's actually focus on what the choices are here, because like Thomas Sowell always said, there's how do you say, the whole thing about there's no like good decision, there's only trade-offs. So the trade-off of not doing anything about the situation now is that Russia's going to keep expanding into Europe. I don't trust those wine-sipping Europeans to do that much, honestly, when push comes to shove. They're probably going to, let Poland take care of itself. I'm not feeling too confident in the Europeans, but I do feel confident in Americans, as far as Americans haven't been, spiritually at least circumcised, as far as their, you know what I mean, like not circumcised, but yeah, circumcision is also like I'm not a fan. But anyway, when we're talking about Americans being spiritual, they're not spiritual eunuchs. They still believe in some kind of a, greater glory, greater thing, whatever you want to say. And yeah, maybe a lot of that is also from the Christian ethos, you could say. They're not just living for themselves, maybe. And again, these are all maybes. These are all like offhand things that I've noticed. But I think that America does have what it takes to change what's going on right now in Europe. I don't really think the Europeans have what it takes, but the number one thing right now is to get a lot of these MAGA people to open up their eyes and to understand how foolish they're being in just merely reacting to, oh, Biden supports Ukraine, so I'm going to be against Ukraine. It's like, okay, nice going, genius. What are you going to do when, Russia's going to be, going from Poland to, whatever, like the other Eastern European countries, and going to Western Europe, and China's going to be all empowered now to go into Taiwan. It's just going to be pure chaos. Why? Because you don't want to do the same thing that Biden's doing. Congratulations. Okay, well, that's my whole spiel about
I want to get to the
Russia.
I want to go
Yeah.
to the root of this tree because I am a self-professed ignoramus when it comes to politics and economics and geopolitics, all that sort of stuff. I've avoided it my whole life. And when Trump came on the scene, I got a little bit excited about politics because who's this guy? Like this is like, he's charismatic and he's a troublemaker, and that caught my attention. And I like that. I don't think he's fully or properly Christian or whatever. I don't even think he's pro-life, but he did a lot for the pro-life movement. So they're pros and cons, trade-off, whatever. I like him, I find him exciting, and I don't trust him 100% obviously, and I think he's a flawed human being. But he got me excited a little bit about politics, and a lot of my friends are interested in Trump and support Trump. I got the hat, I got the MAGA hat, but somewhat ironically, but I all of this to say that I'm a noob when it comes to politics. Please take everything I say with a grain of salt and don't laugh at me. But I want to understand the root of this tree. How do economics and politics work together? You know, Marx had his theories, which most people on the right reject just outright. But you know, and I agree that it's wrong because it's atheistic at heart. Different political philosophers have had their ideas. We've tried out different forms of democracy, and we can go back to classical Athens and look at what they did. Um, Read the Republic. There's a lot of stuff in there. I want you to give me sort of the Coles Notes political philosophy and economics sort of starters kit. What's going on? How does power work? Like I'm not. I don't have power. I don't
Yeah.
aspire to power. I'm anti ambitious, but you know, I'm still in the game. $1 one vote. I still and I actually vote in politics and stuff like that. So like I have a little bit of power, and
Yeah.
you know, I fit into the hierarchy
Probably
somewhere.
for Trudeau, right? Trudeau's your man, right?
Ah, I only vote for him from the ankles down. Those socks are so cool. Just kidding. But anyway, how does power work? And is it true, as Alex Jones would say, that the elites are a bunch of, you know, baby killing, blood sucking, you know, not aliens but lizard
Yeah.
people? Like, is it true that the elites are laughing at us because they're just having sex orgies all the time and stuff like that? Like, what is happening, and how many layers of power are there in this world? I know you believe in all kinds of layers of reality, but just sticking to Earth and geopolitics,
Yeah.
like what's happening with power, economics, and why are people starving? Like there's a child dying of starvation every 7 seconds. What the bleep is happening?
I mean, there's so much there. If we're talking about, and again, this is just like
Yeah,
skimming
yeah,
from the top
yeah,
over
yeah.
here, but we have a problem. Not a because look, a lot of like the edgy 4chan people, they were talking about race or blah 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 blah. We have a cultural situation where there are different cultures. There are people who have lived very different ways, and like I was giving you the example of the Russians, they were living in a much freer way before they were put under the thumb of the Mongols, and that made them, I'd say, something whose repercussions we saw during communism, during World War II, and afterwards, where they became people who would, sell out their own just to, feel good. Because it's this very, like, it's probably one of the most sickest mentalities that a person could have, where they don't even care what happens to them. They want something bad to happen to their neighbor. Even if they get hurt as well, they get a certain sick satisfaction from their neighbor suffering. So just to paint you a picture of like what ends up happening with this mentality, and these are people that supposedly like are orthodox and all of that, but again, it's all pretense. The whole thing is pretense. All the orthodox, pretty much all the orthodox priests in Russia who are part of that Russian church, like the senior ones, they're all KGB. They were all, including Father Kirill, KGB agents who were telling on their, the
The
people
flock.
who, yeah, the flock. They were telling on their flock to the wolves. Like that's what they were doing, man. And it's this kind of mentality that is the reason why I think that Russia and China, for that matter, because China has a similar thing going on with this top-down dictatorship, very different than the direction that Deng Xiaoping wanted it to go in. They have this downward spiral going on right now, with Russia clinging on to, these past glories of World War II, even though that too, it didn't have to work out that way. The Russian generals were like sitting down like somewhere far away eating caviar. Meanwhile, just like bodies upon bodies of these poor Russians were being thrown, at the Nazis there. But the point is that that is not a way to go as far as an industrialized nation where you have this top down dictator who rules over everything. And this has been one of my biggest critiques of people who are on the right, is that they are willing to, for the sake of correcting the problems, they are willing to put a dictator in charge. And I've had many conversations like this with people. Some of them have said like, well, I understand and we're working it out, like we're trying to figure out a way that this is not going to happen. But this is all theory. And the problem with theory is that at the end of the day, theory doesn't matter. What matters is how you're going to react when some charismatic, Adolf Hitler
Mm,
2.0
mm.
comes into the picture. What are you going to do? I bet you're going to be fine with it. I bet you're not you, but you know what I mean? Like, I bet you, as in a
Well, I
lot
have
of
to admit,
these trad.
I have to admit, I do find Nick Fuentes rather charming, but
Oh man. By the way, the whole Fuentes thing with the cat boys and
yeah,
all of that, a lot of the gay stuff, what I think that is I think that he is a master manipulator,
yeah,
and I think that he does that intentionally because a lot of these poor and addicted Zoomers end up looking up to him
uh,
because there's this connection with sex. And kind of like I was talking in the very beginning with somebody like Andrew Tate and Islam and stuff like that,
right, right,
people can grab onto
yeah,
things when you present it in this very relatable way.
yeah,
And what's more relatable to these poor zoomers than just having like these muscle bound twinks with like the cat ears, and having Nick Fuentes become a detective who was searching for certain bodily discharges of his friends, because they're with girls, like all of that kind of gossipy stuff is stuff that a lot of these Zoomers are very much into today. They're into it for the drama. You're not really going to catch that many of them, like legitimately, going to church and all that. Like everything has to be presented in this very seductive package for you to feel like, you're getting all of your forbidden fantasies, answered in these kind of figures. While at the same
vicarious fulfillment.
Exactly, exactly. While at the same, we could say the same with like the whatever podcast, where they have all these OnlyFans girls, even though the guy who runs it is Orthodox, And again, like there are various elements going on today where it is the combination of sex, sex
Mm,
sells
mm,
together with the other thing that sells, which is the mentality of wanting to have a dictator, the mentality of wanting to do the absolute worst thing. Because when you think about, for example, like with the Nazis and stuff like that, I really think a lot of the people, especially like a lot of the young people who don't know any better, they are going to jump on that 100%. Because why not? Because the world is screwed up, because this charismatic person, who indulges me with all of these sexual references is somebody who becomes my friend, even though we never even met. It's a similar relationship to like the OnlyFans girls, except this time it's like a well read young man who I think knows very much what he's doing and plays into the whole, coon brained mentality, if you will.
yeah, yeah,
So,
absolutely.
so to make a long story short, like that whole thing about dictatorship, it's going to be too easy. It's going to be extremely easy for a lot of the people who are already brainwashed to jump on that. Meanwhile, you have people on the left who would jump on the left wing dictatorship too, which is again why I think the project of Break the Rules is extremely important because what we're doing here is trying to bring people on who may be from certain realms of that sort while at the same time exposing them to other circles that they're not a part of, and in doing so we end up breaking this, like Alex Jones says, we're breaking the conditioning. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I often ask my guests who know about politics or are interested in it or about history, about a golden age where there was a system. It was maybe it was democracy or something, and it worked nicely, and it was really representative, and people weren't becoming politicians out of avarice or greed or power, lust for power, but just because they were foisted into it by their community because they were the best man for the job. Like, is there a golden age? And I'll warn you, no one has ever claimed that there has been a golden age. Everyone's very realistic in saying no, it's always a hot mess. But maybe you know something they didn't.
No, it's always a hot mess. It just depends the
Oh,
kind of mess. It depends on the kind of mess
are
that you
some
want to
messes
go with.
better
If
than
you,
others? Are some messes better than others? That's the question,
yeah,
basically.
well, it's if I was, let's say, if I was reincarnated, if time didn't work linearly, let's
Uh,
say, and I could get reincarnated, I wouldn't mind just like for a change of pace, get reincarnated as a boomer. So I would grow up in the 50s. I would grow up in the 50s. I would eat like cereal with sugar in it. The cartoons on TV would like be high quality because like back then, this is like more from my animation background. Back then, a lot of these animators did really put a lot of stylistic care into how they presented their cartoons. Today, like we just have like anime and that's good, but back then, as far as the stuff that most kids grew up on, it was actually really high quality, like Huckleberry Hound and things like that. But anyway,
Yeah, yeah,
then the 60s come in, the weed and the LSD, and I would go party
yeah.
and have a lot of sex, do a lot of drugs,
Uh,
listen to rock and roll. And
yeah.
then the 70s, that would be it. And after that, the 80s, I would clean up my act. The economy's coming back.
Yeah.
We got Reagan in office, and now I'm a yuppie. And I have this nice job, and then I go into retirement. I enjoy the 90s and the 2000s, and I'm good.
That sounds pretty
you
good. That
know?
sounds pretty good. You've thought about this before, obviously. You've thought about this before.
A bit. I don't know. It's just I like observing different things that happen in reality in different ages. So, for example, how people related to each other, in like the 60s and the 70s, and it did seem like people, at least observing it, were very chill. And even like in the 50s, people talk about the 50s as being like this very staunch conservative age, and it's like no. The thing about the 50s is that, at least it seems to me, it's like the opposite of now, where in the 50s, people were actually having a lot of sex. And, my apologies to the Christians in the audience, but they were having a lot of sex out of wedlock. But the difference is that they knew how to present themselves and how to like keep it from being like so in your face. You know
Crass.
what I mean?
It's so
Like, and
crass today. Everything is
yeah,
crass. There's no mystery. There's no mystery. Like, I
yeah.
mean, they're just throwing themselves at you. These women. Sometimes you wonder how desperate this younger generation is. It's just there's no self respect. There's no self respect. I don't want to bash on the young people, but I mean, it's just it's true. Like you watch the classy old black and white films. There was still that hint of sex, but it was exciting because the girl just shows a bit of neck, and it's like wow, you know. Today they're giving it all
Oh,
away
bit of
on.
neck. That's Victorian England, where they even put like the covers on the piano legs.
Ah,
You heard about that one?
yeah, 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 yeah. Very prudish in that way, but that's where it's at. I mean, that's even God himself. He conceals. He doesn't reveal. He conceals himself. It's sexier, you know. So I want to switch topics before we wrap things up here because I do have to go back to the wife. I want to do like sort of rapid fire cultural, more lighthearted topics. I see a lot of books behind you. I don't want to talk about nonfiction. I want to talk about fiction. What do you like reading? Literature. I want to talk about music. You mentioned the music and you mentioned my favorite eras of music. I love the 70s. I love that prog rock, but I also love jazz from the 40s and stuff like that. So I want you to talk about that. You mentioned TV, so
Sure.
maybe TV and movies, that sort of thing. I tried to ask Sticks about this stuff, and he didn't really get excited about it, but a lot of my guests do. And because of Sticks, now I've discovered a really good fantasy writer. He's a Christian fantasy writer, this guy Blaylock,
Mm.
and I just started reading this book, The Elfin Ship. So I'm glad I asked him, even though he seemed kind of bored with the question, but I got a really exciting result from it. But anyway, go to town with the sort of the light pop culture stuff for me.
So, fiction, uh, I really like a lot of these classic Russian authors like Pushkin,
Ah,
for
okay.
example, and Lev Tolstoy,
Uh-huh.
with the same, the namesake,
You can read it in
War and
Russian? You
Peace.
can read it in Russian?
I can read in Russian. I mean, I prefer
Wow.
reading it in English, but the
Okay.
interesting thing about War and Peace is that many parts of it are actually written in French because back then the Russian nobility were speaking French for the most part. A lot of them didn't even know how to
Oh.
speak Russian.
Oh.
'Cause it was like you gotta imagine it's like being an alien, being a Russian noble during, like, the all those times.
Ah.
Because the people, like I mentioned, the people were just like this breeding farm stock. They were, like, completely separate from the nobility. And then you had, like, some middling classes there with, like, merchants and people like that, but even those people had nothing to do with the Russian nobility. You had like assigned seating in the theater. You could never sit, like if you were a noble, you could never sit where like a non-noble is supposed to sit, and vice versa. But anyway, I like those books also because even though it's fiction that's based on reality. Like it's based on different characters that, for example, Lev Tolstoy met and different things that he learned about. And in a way, doing it in that way, I find fiction tells you a lot more about reality than a lot of the,
Nonfiction.
realistic, yeah, a lot of nonfiction does. Other things that I like reading got Murakami in the background here, Haruki Murakami. I have, let's see, Yukio Mishima as well, though I got to read a lot more from him.
What is that?
Uh, we got Yukio Mishima, the Japanese author, and we got William Shakespeare, Homer, the Odyssey, Iliad, but I actually haven't read that in a long time. I'm not gonna flex on my Homeric knowledge right now. Vladimir Nabokov, that's another
Uh,
great author who
uh,
I'm a very big fan of.
mm,
Let's see what else. As far as movies go, similar kind of like film snob type of deal. Kubrick,
yeah.
Kurosawa, Fellini, all of that. In fact, I got a big book over here, Fellini's Dreams. Here you can see how big this book is. Right here, look at this thing.
Wow. Is it
This
illustrated?
is the act. It is illustrated. This is the actual size of Fellini's sketchbook that he used
Wow.
to record his dreams in. It's like the same
Wow.
material, the same size. So they just made a copy of it.
Wow. What's that worth?
I don't remember. I got it a long time ago. But that's actually another interesting thing that I forgot to mention. I also have a lot of dreams, and
Oh,
I
yeah.
record my dreams down too.
No way.
And so far, I think I'm up to I think I'm up to like 300 pages now of recorded dreams. I've been doing it since 2017. And I don't have dreams every day, but I have them often enough. Like sometimes I would have like one dream every day, like per week. So it depends. But
What are the recurring
I like
themes? What are the recurring themes?
Well, I gotta put it
Sex.
all into a document, and then I'm gonna use AI to scan my entire history of dreams, so it'll tell me like what the recurring themes are because there's just
Oh.
like so many to take a
Ah.
look at, you know what I mean? But some interesting things happen. Like for example, I have a cat, my cat, this black cat named Steve. He has like a white spot on his chest, and like in the bikini line over here, he has like a white bikini. What do you call it? Bikini bottom or whatever. Anyway, and he's also got like this brown fur as well. But anyway, whenever I dream of Steve, there's like other cats too. Like I keep thinking I have other cats in my in my dream. I like forgot about him. I don't know if you ever had like an experience like
I'll tell
that,
you one
but
experience
let's
I
see what
had.
else.
Let me tell you one thing I had.
Yeah.
I had a dream. My wife thinks I'm crazy because, well, for many reasons, but not least of which is that I'm Catholic. But, I sometimes dream about myself, which is not that unusual, but where there are multiples of me. Like there was a trinity of Daves in one dream. It was
Mm.
like, but I got along so well with them. It was like amazing. I really felt at home.
Good people. Good people. Well, let's Okay, so over here, okay, this is just like a random dream. I have no idea what's going to be in here. I was coming out of my apartment and it was a cloudy day. There was a stall with Japanese food on my left, and it felt like being in New York City. I floated in such a way that my legs were hanging in front, so they dangled in front of people, which I had apologized for, including like this woman there. So basically, imagine this: imagine like you're floating, but you're floating and your legs are like in front of you like this. Do you know what I mean? They're just like, yeah, it's like you're sitting down, but you're floating. So imagine you just like use your mind to float around the dreamscape and you like bump into people like with your legs. It's very rude, right? To do that. But anyway, there was a Japanese man in purple and he was criticizing me. I met him, blah, 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 blah. I told him my situation with Kundalini, and he invited me to have some sake with him and his friends. Both he and his friend were wearing purple suits, though his looked more detailed. The other guy also, there was like a big guy here, like very earthy looking guy who came in, and he was the first one to pour the sake. I instinctively knew to let him drink first before me. Later, the Japanese men went to an island away from here. I had a pack of Roman lances, which were more like thin like tips, like little things, and I couldn't understand why they were so small. Okay, the rest of this has to do with girls, so I'm gonna skip the names here so we don't. Yeah. Anyway,
Cool. Very cool.
yeah.
Wow.
So
Did you have to, let me just put it this way, when you were journaling, did the recall become better and better, more and more detail? Or was it day one of journaling, it was like just like what you read me? Lots of detail.
I don't know. It's pretty much been consistent. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less. I
Okay.
can't say like I'm going into any like upwards trajectory or
Okay.
downwards trajectory.
Okay.
It's pretty much, you
Okay.
have good days and you have bad
Yeah,
days.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But you still have dreams that are just like this one little segment. Okay, I was on the beach, and then the dream switched to I was in a restaurant, and then there's a longer episode where it's more like a story. But you do still get
Yeah.
patchy. You still get patchy stuff, right?
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. Here's an
Switches around.
example
It switches
of the
around.
patchiness. I went to a mansion where there was a group of men and women. I went to the back, and the woman there gave me a Masonic handshake. Uh-oh.
Oh.
Her hand was smooth, and I tried repeating the pattern as well as I could recall. Some were dressed goofy, like a man was dressed in the checkerboard pattern. They stood on the wide mantle with their heads to the wall at first. Oh, okay. I'm gonna skip that. Some started to turn around, and one woman got so intense that she was thrown to the other side of the room, um, and she got knocked out with a bloody wound on her head. This was attacked from the outside by what I recall were Sailor Moon clones, along with many Meowths. If you recall Pokemon, you know the Pokemon Meowth?
No.
It's like a cat Pokemon, like with whiskers. It's got like a little coin
Okay.
on its lobe. These Meowths tried getting other Pokemon to help, but the Pokemon were busy scurrying around the forest in their own groups. So it's like this whole Pokemon invasion and weird ceremony type of
Cool.
Masonic thing going on. It's
Wow.
nuts, man.
Very cool. Very cool.
So
That's a treasure, man. You should keep doing it, and I should start doing it again because I used to do this journaling when I was a bit younger. But yeah, it's an excellent, excellent hobby, and it's just free entertainment. And going back and reading it is
yeah,
such a delight for you, I'm sure. You know, and it probably helps you during the day.
definitely,
It helps
definitely.
you during the day because you're a creative type of person. It helps you during the day. This dream journaling will help you to notice things, right? Like you'll actually be paying attention, or maybe you'll inform your dreams more consciously in a more conscious way, or by questioning your reality. I mean, you're already questioning reality more than most people. So by questioning reality, and one of the techniques of lucid dreaming is to just look at your hand all the time. Just look at your hand, look at your hand, look at your hand, and just ask
Mm.
yourself, am I dreaming? Am I dreaming? And that's just a technique for so that eventually through habit you will look at your hand in a dream and you'll ask yourself if you're dreaming. And I haven't had success with that technique, but apparently it works. So
For me, it was writing. I just noticed that if I notice the writing in the dream is like all gobbledygook, then I know that something's up.
it's not static. The writing is never static, is it? It's never static. It's
No,
changing.
no, especially when you try to like put information in your phone in the dream, it doesn't. It's not good.
What about the fine arts? Do you like a certain era? Do you like, the Impressionist, or do you like pop art, or did you ever get excited about art history at all, Western art?
Sure, absolutely.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, I
you're an
love
artist. I forgot you're an artist.
the
Yeah, of course you did.
Renaissance.
Yeah. Oh, you
Yeah,
like the
yeah. I
Renaissance?
mean, I mean, it's such a broad thing though, right? Because it's like every single era has its own thing that you can like. I don't know.
Yeah, but
It's
you went to
every
art school, right? You went to art school?
I did. I went to a school of visual arts.
Yeah. So they must have made
Yeah.
you read a
By the
bunch of
way,
stuff.
nah, I mean, so, here's the thing. College, it's not. Nah, no, no, it's not that. It's the internet. Okay, with the internet, we can see whatever we want, learn whatever we want at a way that it works for us.
Mhm.
Honestly, like I think some of the classes I took there, they turned me off from certain things as
Oh.
opposed to turning me on to certain things. I did have the two best classes I had though was number one, the perspective class. That one was amazing. We
Mhm.
had a great teacher there, and number two, the one art history class, the history of graphic design. That was a good class. That was a good class. I enjoyed that one. But otherwise, like the history of ancient civilizations, which, like you would think, oh my God, that's like my thing. But we had this horrible teacher who used to be obsessed with dates. And that's the worst thing, by the way. If you want to get kids interested in ancient civilization, stop being so anal retentive about the specific date. Okay?
Tell a
Like
story.
it's
Tell
not
us
a
a story. Tell us
memorization.
a story.
Yeah, yeah. It shouldn't be a memorization thing because eventually the dates will come. Eventually you'll know when what happened, but don't start with that. That's the wrong thing to start with, right?
Yeah, 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 yeah. So what's coming up next? I'm gonna have to wrap it up here, but well, I hope you come back. I mean, it's been a blast talking with
I
you.
would love
I
to.
got a lot more
And I would
questions.
love And I would love to have you on Break the Rules with Gnostic Informant. We're gonna have to find a date to do that. And also, Styx is coming back to BTR Break the
Yeah,
Rules
yeah.
this Sunday. Sunday, Sunday, Sunday.
What time?
Styx is coming back. It's gonna be 5 p.m.
It's one on one, or you got a someone to contrast him
Two
with?
people, two people. It's gonna be Styx, and it's gonna be the Distributist, and it's gonna be debate about Neo reaction.
Okay. Okay, I don't know what that is, but I'll watch and I'll see.
Watch it, you'll see. I think you'll enjoy. It's gonna be great. But yeah, David, I really appreciate the fact that we got to talk here,
Yeah.
and the fact that we got to do the back and forth and disagree and all that. I think it's beautiful. I think it's very important that people can be honest, forthright with each other in good faith, being able to talk about all these things and just figure life out as best as we can. So if you guys, by the way, have not subscribed to Dave, subscribe right now. Smash that subscribe button.
I never do that. I never promote like, subscribe, and all that. So I never do
That's
that.
why I'm doing it for you. That's why I'm doing it for you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. One last quiz question is just because I'm curious. I'm just curious. Like, Styx describes himself as a classical liberal, like as a pragmatic libertarian. Are you comfortable with any label of your politics at all?
Yeah, I think classic liberal would pretty much suit what I am, which is a nice coincidence that Styx has the same thing. As far as our differentiations go, I'm gonna have to look a little bit deeper. Like, I think we're both skeptical of having too much authority being given to one person. And again, like with somebody like Trump, this is why I'm a bit skeptical of Trump, as far as he doesn't seem like the kind of person that, if an opportunity presented itself for him to like have full power, that he would ever want to let go of that power once he had it. Again, there's no evidence for this. I'm just saying, like, it seems like that. But again, I Trump to me is like a mystery. I don't know exactly what's going to happen when it comes to him in Ukraine, because he doesn't really seem to like Ukraine. He doesn't like Zelensky. But as far as what happens afterwards, I also know that America does not want to be seen, or rather, Trump, to rephrase, Trump doesn't want America to be seen as weak. So if there's a situation where war breaks out in Europe and America's just like on the sidelines there, turtle shell isolation mode, I think that would make America just look really weak. I don't
Yeah.
know. So maybe he's going to be different than the Trump MAGA people who are very much in favor of isolationism. And with Sticks, that may be like the big difference between me and Sticks is the whole question about Ukraine. But I really think that it's more just from not diving as deep into the topic for Sticks, as far as certain things about Ukraine. But who knows what's going to happen in the future.
Yeah.
But either way, Sticks is a great guy,
Yeah.
and I really
All
appreciate
right.
the fact that all of us here are being able to have these conversations.
Yeah. So are you gonna take inspiration from my crazy story and actually like go down and visit him in Rutland or what?
Yes, because I want to get some of the chamomile seeds, because I want to
Oh,
start planting chamomile next year.
oh,
And I bought some like Roman chamomile supposedly from this Etsy place. But the thing is that this chamomile, it was written that it was like a potpourri. That's never a good sign. And it wasn't written that it was it was like to infuse with. And
uh,
I never
uh,
understood,
uh,
why are you not labeling this as tea? But then I drank it and it was gross. It was disgusting.
uh,
There is no way that that was the same chamomile that Sticks takes. So I wonder what went on there. What is this weird? I'm gonna have to bring that chamomile to
Yeah,
Sticks as an example, so that his botany knowledge could be put to some use, and he could tell me like what's going on here.
very
Did I
cool.
almost poison myself or something? I don't know.
Are you gonna bring Steve with you or no?
No, no, no. He's a cat. He's a house cat, strictly house cat. He's not allowed outside. He tried to run away like one time. He didn't know what he was doing. It
Traumatized
was
for
just,
life.
well, he was actually bored like outside, and I originally found, well, my family and I found him and his father. And his father and him were brought in, but then his father ran away, but he remained. And he's remained ever since. And he's, wonderful, wonderful little guy. He's an angel. I
Cute.
love him.
Very
Yeah.
cute. One last question. I promised my last question. What's with the love life? Did you meet a girl, get married, or what's happening?
Well, that's something that I want to focus after Break the Rules grows a little bit. Right now, I'm mainly focusing on career, career, career,
Okay.
because I know that any girl that's like that, it's important. It's important to have that kind of stability. But again, don't want to wait too long. But let's see what happens. I would definitely love to have a family. Have a wife and kids
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
all that good stuff. Because I definitely know that it changes you as a person. You really do become a different person, and I think it is an important part of this whole journey in life. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you're a good-looking guy. You must be getting chicks sliding into your DMs all the time, no?
Well, when I'm in the city, I mean that's a different story. But right now, I'm in Long Island. I'm in the sticks, the woods. So
Oh.
it's it's nice to be around nature. But that's why
Yeah.
I kind of do both. And in fact, this is why we're gonna have announcement. Break the Rules is gonna be live in New York City. We're gonna have Jason Giorgiani there, and this got happening on February 1st. I'm working on the studio right now. It's still in the process, but it's gonna look really beautiful. There's gonna be like these beautiful red curtains, and the foam stuff is gonna be in a nice checkerboard Masonic pattern, and good cameras and all of that. But it's a very different thing to actually have a stream where you're like physically there with a
Yes.
guest. So
Yeah.
if you're ever in New York City,
Oh yeah.
hit me up. I would love to do like a
Cool.
live thing and all that good stuff.
Well,
Yeah.
very cool. Well, you mentioned the red curtains. It reminds me of Lynch, one of my favorite directors. And
Yeah.
one of my favorite films is very controversial. It's Inland Empire. I don't know if you've seen it, but if you haven't seen it, you should check it out.
That's the one Lynch film I don't think I've seen yet. Is it similar to the rest of his stuff?
Somewhat. You can see Mulholland Drive, hints of Mulholland Drive in it, and there's actually a little nod to Mulholland Drive in there if you like that one. But yeah, there's it's Inland Empire, so it's set in that sort of California vibe with the Hollywood and that whole movie mafia culture and women as whores, that archetype of woman as whore, and there's a whole psychological multi-layered thing. Do you like Hitchcock at all?
Of course, yeah. I
Yeah.
like Hitchcock.
Did you like
Yeah.
Lars von Trier's work?
I think I only saw the
Dancer in the Dark.
one that he did. No,
The
no,
old.
the one that he a nymphomaniac. Was that him?
Uh, I'm not familiar with that one. Was that with that red-headed
Char-
Australian chick?
Charlotte Charlotte Gainsbourg.
No, haven't
Gainsbourg.
seen that. Was it good?
Yeah,
Okay.
Maniac, Gainsbourg. Yeah, I'm interested. Is that Lars von Trier? I'm sure it is, but let's see if I'm
Go
right.
Google it.
Yes, written and directed by Lars von Trier. Watch Nymphomaniac.
Okay.
With the wife and.
It's not too many sex scene. Not too many sex scenes in it. I hope.
Oh, I mean, how could there be too many sex scenes in a name like Nymphomaniac?
uh, I don't know if you caught it when Sticks made fun of me when I said, "Oh, well, we can Google it," and he's like, "I don't use Google. I use Bing," and I'm like, "Oh, sorry, excuse me."
Bing's nice. I don't know. I mean, Google, it's kind of like Apple sticks is a big stickler for not using Apple
Yeah.
products, and it's all bad. But I guess yeah, I'm not a big fan of Google either. I like Bing. I like Brave Search. I don't know what Brave uses, but I use Brave browser. I like Brave. It's got a line on it. and my name Lev means lion in Russian and heart in Hebrew, lion-hearted.
Uh,
So it all works out. It all works out.
lion like the big cat lion, or lion like a lion?
Yeah,
Oh,
like a big cat. I
oh,
ain't lying.
wow, very cool. Well, it's been a joy meeting you, my brother, and I can't wait to come on your podcast, and can't wait to have you back on mine. My calendar is booked till like the end of March. Um, because I belong to this thing. I don't know if you're interested, but there's this thing called Pod Match where they hook up hosts with guests. It's like a dating app, but
Mm.
for podcast hosts and things. And I pay $6 a month for it, but I've been getting like a couple hundred a month back from them. I don't know how it works, but like people are somehow some money is coming back to me from that. I don't make any money at all with the podcast, like with YouTube or anything. I don't have that many viewers, but for some reason, with this Pod Match, I guess there's some sort of payback system, like when you have people on your show. It's not much, but the main advantage of it is you meet all kinds of weird people that you would never meet in real life, like experts in fields that you're not necessarily interested in, a lot of life coaches, a lot of people that are into a specific new age thought and all this sort of thing. So it might be interesting for you if you are looking for guests. It might be interesting.
That's pretty cool. That's
Yeah.
stuff something I'm gonna have to look at a little bit a little bit more. It seems very interesting though. I would definitely want to look into that.
And the young guy who made it, Alex, he's a Sicilian by origin. He's such a sweet guy, so accessible. If you email, he's the one that directly answers. He came on my podcast. He talked to me. He's like really down
Nice.
to earth. He's like the IT guy behind this project, and like he's a very successful businessman. But he's also Christian, and he takes care, to give good service and value for. And his main thing is to give back to people, and help people and that sort of thing. So I'm very, very impressed. And I've been sort of promoting him a little bit just because I like him and whatever. And he sent me a free T-shirt for a pod match and stuff like that. So it's just like cozy. You don't get that a lot in today's world, especially on the internet. Where you meet the guy who founded this thing or whatever, and it's like you
Yeah.
it's like you with your podcast. You're very accessible and down to earth. I hope you remain that way. And as we were saying before going live, like it's just mind blowing how Styx is so humble and kind and sweet and gentle and down to earth, and it's amazing.
Great dude. I got to get those seeds for him though. I got to get those Roman chamomile seeds.
Yes, yes, I'm a big fan of chamomile. I drink chamomile all the time. There's a Greek equivalent. It's called mountain tea. I'm gonna ask him about that
Mm.
next time. But take good care. I'm gonna be praying for you and yours just because that's what I do. And you can do your equivalent for me. Send me good thoughts or good vibes, or if you do pray, pray for me and mine. Okay.
All right. Thank you very much, David. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me. Have a great night. And yeah, you guys, if you want to support Break the Rules, by the way, patreon.com/break the rules. Become a patron today. You will not regret it. I'm gonna have like the behind the scenes streams as well, probably like with your Johnny when he's gonna be in the city. Anyway, guys, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Take good care and God bless you. We'll talk soon.
Bye bye.
Peace out. Bye.